Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of KidLit Love. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Jyoti Rajan Gopal. Jyoti is the author of multiple picture books, including One Sweet Song and American Daisy. She's here today to talk about her newest picture book, Love is Here With You, a lullaby of blessings. It's a beautiful book full of lullabies and love, a sure favorite for bedtime reading and beyond. I can't wait to hear the inspiration behind it and to talk about all the things. So let's just jump right into the episode today. Jyoti, welcome to KidLit Love. I am so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. It is my pleasure and privilege to be with you in conversation about books and book love.
Yes, all the book love. I wish listeners could see us because I have the most magnificent view of your bookshelves behind you, just filled with book love. I keep finding my eyes are like moving beyond you and just trying to figure out all the titles on your shelf.
Yeah, books have been a staple in my life since I was a little girl, and my mom she always said to me, she's like, I knew you were either going to be a teacher or a bookshop owner.
Yeah.
They've always been my friends, and they continue to be so.
And so to lead us into the introduction of you, you chose teacher, right?
I did.
Tell us a bit about your journey and how you got to where you are in KidLit today.
Sure. So growing up, I never anticipated being a writer at all. It wasn't something that ever entered my mind, and I did love the idea of working with kids. And so when I went to college, I didn't really go to study teaching. I actually studied psychology, thinking I was going to go into advertising. What a joke! That's like totally not my style at all. But I was teaching kids while I was in college and realized that I really loved it, and found my way through working in a small village in Haryana, working with deaf children and children with cerebral palsy, and then moved to China after my master's because my parents were based there at the time. And I should say that I'm an international kid. So I was born in India, but I did not grow up in India. I lived in different Asian countries, studying in international schools. And so I went back to India for college. And so my parents actually hadn't seen me for a while. Like I would just visit on holidays, and they were like, "Oh, you've graduated from your master's program. Come and stay with us." And I said I would if I could find a job in China. And in Beijing, where they lived, I was hired as a kindergarten teacher at this international school. So I sort of went back to my international school roots and discovered kindergarten and just loved it. And so that's kind of how I entered teaching. And I stopped for a short period of time when I had my daughters, but and was a full-time stay-at-home mom, but went back to teaching kindergarten. And it was in 2018 that I had written a story like 14 or so years ago, a nonfiction story. Again, something that I wanted to write for my kindergartners because I didn't see it out there, and I'm a big nonfiction lover, picture book lover. But, I was like, I'm not a writer. This is like, I'm just going to leave it on my computer. And I was very intimidated by the children's publishing world. And I was like, I can't really figure this out. So I have my teaching life, and I put it away. But in 2018, I decided that I was going to try to do something with that picture book. I was going through a lot of creative angst, and my teaching life was a little bit in flux, and I think I was putting my creative energies into this new phase of my life where I was like wanting to write stories. And that's kind of how entering picture book world began as a writer, because I was so familiar with the picture book world as a mom and as a teacher, right? Um, that's when I entered the writing phase, and it sort of took over my life. I suddenly found myself, I started with nonfiction, had no intention of writing fiction at all. But I think in the process of writing nonfiction, the creative juices sort of opened up, and I found myself writing not only just fiction, but rhyming fiction. Um, and rhyming stories. And so, yeah, and that's kind of how it took off into the writing world. So I taught some more while writing. And then 3 years ago, I stopped teaching, and I am now entirely focused on my writing career.
I've got to say that that is like my educator's dream in my head. And I know there are lots of people listening saying, yes, go, Jyoti, yes.
Just do it. You can do it. Just do it. In school, I was like that creative writer that just sort of was like, no,
Yeah,
I
that
can't write.
would be me too. Yeah.
Yeah, I just couldn't write on demand. It was really hard for me. So I was a good academic writer, and I did write as a teacher for teacher publications and for science. I wrote science articles and all of that sort of stuff. You can find me, I've written stuff, but creative writing was not my jam. So it was very hard for me. So I'm like the most surprised that I'm actually doing it now.
Yeah.
I think it just needed the right time.
That I find for everything, right? It's the right time, it's the right moment, you're ready, the stars align, and
Yeah.
then once it does, like you said, you just couldn't stop. Like you just kept writing and
Yeah.
expanding your writing, and that's a sure sign that it was meant to be right then.
Yeah.
2018 was that pivot.
Yep. For sure. For
Oh,
sure.
so tell us some of your titles that we're not talking about today, but I would love to have you mention.
Sure. So my first picture book that you mentioned was American Daisy. That came out in 2022, about a little girl straddling her Indian and American self and trying to figure out where she fit in. And this was based on my two daughters growing up here, but also on me. So I'm known as a third culture kid, which is a child who does not live in their home country, which was India at the time, and has a culture at home, which was my Indian culture, but also has her school culture, which was very much an American international school culture. So I sort of like was jumping these three. So my host country, my school culture, and my home culture. And so I often felt like I was straddling lots of different worlds. And it was actually a gift in many, many ways, because I do feel like I can code switch pretty easily. I don't even know I'm doing it. I feel like I fit in everywhere, but then at other times you kind of feel like you fit in nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel separate from every part of those Venn circles, And so that was the book that I wrote, sort of described that feeling. And it felt even more so here for my girls in America, because they are American citizens. They are American, and yet sometimes they are perceived as other.
Right.
So it was stronger, I think, even for them. So that was my first book. And then I wrote a few more. My Pati Saris came out also in 2022. And that was a story about a grandmother and her grandson and how much he loved her saris. And it was inspired by a little moment in my kindergarten classroom, um, with a little boy, and, playing with my sari that I had brought in for International Day, and my love for sari. So that story was inspired by that. Desert Queen was my first nonfiction book. It was a picture book biography, about a drag performer that I met in Rajasthan, whose name is Queen Harish. And that actually won the ALA 2024 Stonewall Award, which I'm so proud
Wow.
of. The illustrations by Swabu are just spectacular. So if you haven't seen that, listeners, please go take a look. And then you mentioned One Sweet Song, which was inspired by the pandemic, Stephanie. It was inspired by the singers in Italy who came out on the balconies to
Yeah.
play music for each other. And I remember watching that video, and it was like, oh my gosh, we were all so isolated. We were in our own little pockets, but that video, sort of how we all connected together, it
Yeah.
made me so emotional. And that inspired One Sweet Song, which was about a community coming together in music. And then I have Sister Day, which was inspired by my two girls. And it's a rhyming story about two girls who are having a great time. And then suddenly they have a fight. And oh no, what's going to happen? And whether they make up and, continue their day. And then, the latest is Love Is Here With You, a lullaby of blessings, again inspired by a lullaby that my mom sang to me and my brother when we were little. And then she taught it to me and I would sing it. We would sing it to our daughters. I would sing it to my daughters and she would sing it to them too. And it's always been in my head that I'm going to, I was like, I need to make this into I think I want to make this into a picture book, but I didn't know how to do it because it's a Malayalam song. But I wanted to write something that would evoke that feeling that I had when I would sing it to my daughters. And that's where Love Is Here With You came from.
Oh, so in my mind, I keep thinking 2018 was your pivotal moment of
Yeah.
I'm going to write. From 2018 to 2024, that's busy. That's
It
a
is
lot of
busy.
books. That's a lot of books. I love seeing it. Like you literally meant it just poured out
It
and
really did.
people
Yeah.
responded.
Yeah. So yeah, my first picture book came out in June of 2022. And so
Wow.
since then, I've now have 6 books out, which is crazy. It's
It
crazy. I
is.
am very blessed, very grateful. I have an amazing agent, Wendy Gu. She's absolutely amazing. But yeah, I feel like everything just sort of aligned. So I'm very
Yeah.
lucky.
It was meant to be. In listening to your books and your quick descriptions of them, I really see the themes that you mention on your website. I love stalking authors and learning all about them and their backstories and their websites. And listening to you talk about each of your books, I can really see where that philosophy or the themes that you have woven are front and center because on your website, you say you write stories of identity, community, and belonging. And I could hear those themes in all of the books that you've mentioned. And I felt those themes in Love Is Here with you as well. So just beautiful, a beautiful collection that you have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel like that's all, we're all looking for that, right? In some way or the other, a place to belong, a
Yeah.
place that feels like home, um, a place of comfort. And we all experience that in different ways. And some of us struggle more than others to find that space, I think. And yeah, I'm so glad that you felt that in my books too, because that is really what I try to share.
Oh, I felt it. I have a list in my book journal that says books I've hugged. And yours is a book that I hugged for sure after finishing it.
Stephanie, can I just say something to you that just fills my heart that you said that because Kaylin Adair, who is the editor for this book, actually when we saw the illustrations for the first time in full color, she sent them to me. She said, "Oh my goodness, this book is like a warm hug."
It is.
And I was like, "Yes,
It
she's
is.
absolutely right."
That is exactly it.
Oh,
But what I, in my head is I think, okay, how do I write a review of this book that gets across the huggableness, the warmth of it. And all I could think of was this is a book that is wrapped and will wrap you in warmth and comfort. It was just so soothing of a book. And listeners can't see the pictures, but I do want to talk about them after. But how did you end up making the decisions you did to go from, the lullaby that you sing your own daughters, which clearly is packed with emotion that ends up on the page? How did you go about, like you said, it was a little problematic at first of how do I do this? How did you make those decisions around the structure? Because I love the rhyming nature of it. It is that cadence that just kind of I'm rocking back and forth. It just rocks with you as if you are being sung a beautiful lullaby. Can you talk about how you ultimately chose to bring it to life on the page?
yeah, I'm trying to think back to I think when I first started this book, first of all, I knew it was going to be in rhyme. So I knew that I would write it in rhyme because it was a
Mhm.
lullaby.
Yep.
Um, and I knew I wanted to incorporate um the feeling of the lullaby, which was about mom and dad are here for you, which was the Malayalam lullaby I'm talking about. Mom and dad are here for you. We're going to keep away the noise. We're going to keep away the wind. We're going to keep away the things that are going to disturb your sleep. Close your eyes and don't worry. Don't worry. That's the meaning of the Malayalam lullaby. So I knew I wanted to have that piece of it. And then the second piece of it that I wanted to include was these Carnatic devotional songs that I would also play for my daughters. So Carnatic devotionals are very as classical musical pieces that follow they have frameworks around which they're sung, but they're often songs of praise to the various gods of the Hindu pantheon. And so I knew that I would also wanted to include the gods into the lullaby. And then I had to think about the rhyme scheme. So how do I choose all of these? I picked my favorite gods, of course, but I also had to think about the rhyme scheme and how would they fit into the lullabies, and how would I communicate? And here's a third layer. I wanted it to be an Indian American family, a Desi family that was sharing all their cultural traditions with this little baby of theirs, but also reminding them that you're here in America. This is also your home, but all of this can keep you safe, and you are also going to move forward. So I wanted to have all of these things because those were the things I was thinking about for my daughters when I was singing them to bed at night. I wanted all those feelings communicated to them. So I wanted that communicated in this story too. Um, so those were my three challenges. It actually was not as, I mean, so this was the process I was thinking about, like, how am I going to get this lullaby onto the page in English? Because, it's not a translation at all. It's just the feeling that I wanted to evoke. So once I had those three layers kind of figured out in my mind, okay, I'm going to have to have this, and I'm going to have to have this, and I'm going to have this. And I know it was going to be in rhyme. So now I have my framework within which I am going to throw whatever I can on the page. And so it started off as couplets. If I'm remembering correctly, I started off as couplets. Um, yeah, and that kind of continued, I think, when I continued to rhyme. Crickets sing at twilight's gloam, night birds warble, creatures roam, my sweet baby here at home, my cradle waits for you. And
Oh,
then
I love hearing you read it. I love hearing you read it instead of me read it. I loved that. Even
yeah, it's an AAAB kind of format.
yeah.
So it started off as couplets and then it moved to like that format because that was just the way it came out.
Mm-hmm.
It felt right. It came out that way. And so and then I knew it was going to be from like starting the baby, getting baby ready for bed, and then baby going to sleep. I had that framework too. So then I knew what I had to fill in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I love that you answered that question so thoroughly with these different layers, because as a reader, it just feels like love. It feels like emotion. And so to hear you talk about all of the things that were kind of rattling around for you as you wrote it, what is that quote? And I can't remember who said it. I just hear it a lot, that hard writing makes for easy reading. And I feel like all of those things you had rolling around in there did such a beautiful job of just letting us feel the story and the lullaby and what happens in it. It's beautiful. As an adult who has a very difficult time sleeping and staying asleep and letting go of the day, I am that ruminator, right? The head hits the pillow and the weighted blanket goes on in an attempt to help me sleep. And instead, my mind just like goes and goes and goes. And this book, well, for children, we think that they are for adults here on this podcast.
We sure do.
I felt like this was such an important reminder for me. And since reading it, I have thought about your book when my head hits the pillow to stop the noise and to just remind myself all of what I have, what is looking out for me, it has been such a wonderful, do I say tool? Because it's so much more than a tool, but it really has given me as an adult something to think about and to comfort myself, I guess, when I'm sleeping.
I love that. I really do believe picture books are for grown-ups too. So that
Oh, yes.
is amazing, Stephanie.
Yes, they are. And in the opening, I did say that this is a book that is going to be a sure favorite at bedtime with caregivers, but it's not. just a bedtime book, right? This is a book for librarians, for educators of all ages, for kids to read during the day when they are not sleepy, because it just introduces them to so much, to these
Mm.
ideas, to these beautiful words and language. I really love that on certain pages you have that definition that embraces that meaning and it allows us to figure out how to say it correctly so that we can truly embody it. I feel like there's so much that a child, someone could listen to this and they could feel the emotion and they could take it with them for their own bedtime. But it just opens up so much. I thought, I need to learn about this. I
Mm.
want to know about this. I want to know about um, what was the one that got me? Krishna. I can't find it on the page now. I
Yeah.
thought, okay, I need Google. I need to go find out about this because I love learning about things I don't know. And I got introduced to that here in this book too. And so I feel like the book is almost like a portal into figuring out more.
Yes, and I should tell listeners that there is a teacher guide up, because
Great.
there's a lot in here that is going to be unfamiliar to, if you are not a Desi reader, if you're not even a South Indian reader, if you're, there's like cultural traditions, musical traditions. There are
Yes.
things that Nabi depicts so beautifully on the pages that are going to be unfamiliar to people. And I'm like, this is going to need a teacher guide
Yeah.
because for me, when I first saw the sketches, I was like, everything is so familiar to me, like the way the gods and goddesses are portrayed. It never occurred to me that someone might look at this and be like, why does Saraswati have 4 arms?
Right.
Right? Or, why does Ganesha have, or why is, Durga riding on a tiger? Like, what is that about? And of course, for me, it was such a familiar iconography that I didn't even think about it. And then it was only when I had the final author copy in my hand and I was flipping through it, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And I was thinking about my students. I'm like, they are definitely going to ask me, why is she holding all these things in her hand? And why does she have so
Yes.
many? So I was like, I have to create a teacher guide.
I am so glad. I
Yeah.
am so glad because this does just it gets your curiosity for those that are unfamiliar, which, is another reason everyone should be reading picture books. Picture books offer comfort and that emotion, but I think portal is the perfect
I
word.
love
It
that
just
word.
gives you the opportunity to learn. And then in that learning, there's more empathy, there's more understanding, there's more connection. Yeah, your book just does all the things.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, I'll also mention I'm so glad you mentioned the words that the Tamil words that I have in the book because and one of the other reasons why I felt compelled to also write picture books is I'm from South India. I'm half Tamilian and half Keralite. And so when my girls were growing up, first of all, there were hardly any picture books that depicted Indian American kids, much less, South Indian American kids. And so I was like, I kind of feel like I want to fill that space. I want to make sure there are picture books that are depicting, South Indian languages, because typically, more often than not, the North Indian sort of Bollywood version of India is the majority kind of representation that is out there in the Western Hemisphere. And I really wanted to, and that has changed. It is now increasingly more diverse, thank goodness. And I wanted to be a part of that, increasing that diversity. So introducing Tamil culture, Kerala to American readers and the language of these are all words that I use with my girls still.
Yeah.
Like they are my kanmani and they are my chelame, and so I wanted to share that with readers.
Yeah.
Yeah, me
Let's
too.
talk about the pictures.
Mm.
My goodness, these pictures are gorgeous. The color scheme, first of all, the color scheme just wraps you in that emotion. And then it's a book that you want to read and then go back to the beginning and then read and look at the pictures and then do it again because there's so much beauty on these pages. I'd love for you to talk about what you think of those illustrations. I want to make sure that we give credit to that illustrator because
Oh my
it's just
goodness.
such a beautiful book.
Yeah, so the illustrator is Nabi Haider Ali, and Nabi is also South Indian, and so is very familiar with South Indian culture, South Indian religion. I mean, the religions that are present in South India, of which there's a broad range,
Mhm.
and is very familiar with Hindu gods and goddesses, but also with other traditions. And so um, I think that he just brought all of his knowledge and expertise and his interest in mythology and Hinduism and in Islam and Christianity. Those are all woven into the spread. So you've got these Hindu gods and goddesses that are sort of very present in the pages because they are the ones that we are evoking in the lullaby.
Mhm.
But in the cultural traditions of Tamil Nadu and Kerala specifically because he was inspired by Kerala mural art. So you see the cloudy, sort of the curly clouds, those are very typical of the Kerala mural art. And so he's incorporated the dances from the Christian tradition, dances from the Muslim tradition in Kerala, um, some of the instruments that are played by the different communities in Tamil Nadu and Kerala are also from the various faiths. And so I have that information in my teacher guide as well. I just think that he's done and the colors,
Yes.
which are not typical of Kerala mural art, because Kerala mural art uses like greens and reds and blacks, and I think yellows. He's adapted it, and the colors are actually, for me, very typical of the colors used in South Indian temples, the ones in Tamil Nadu specifically. Those have really tall stupas, very tall towers, and the colors are like pinks and blues and greens and reds, and very striking. And so that's what I first thought of when I saw these illustrations. And then, of course, the family and the baby,
Yes.
um,
The
the
expressions.
the expressions on their faces and just the love that they're showing the baby and the baby's
Yes.
expressions when the baby's crying and when the baby's
Yes.
like happy and the baby's like peaceful, like just all of those things. I saw the progression from sketch to completion, and it was just a wow all the
Yeah.
way throughout. Just
Yeah.
really embodied the lullaby, I felt.
It does. It does. I'm so glad you mentioned the colors because I feel like it's the colors that bring a lot of that emotion to your words, and it's just such a beautiful compliment. And you also talked about the baby. I was just in awe of those expressions from, a baby who's not so tired and who's pretty excited to, think about what's going on to that slow, my eyelids are getting a little sleepy and I'm getting cuddled and it's time to go to bed. And there's this one double page spread and listeners can't see it, but there's one at the end, this double page, you have this beautiful purple and gold hue and this baby who's just curled up in typical baby fashion with that sleepy smile on her face, right? The hands want to rub at the eyes. And then you go to the next page, which is the final page of the book, which really for me was the heart stopper, the breathtaking one, because you have the what's here and now in these golden, brighter colors and this family that just so adores this child. But then the rest of the double page spread is in a different hue to symbolize all of that you talked about in the lullaby that is still here too. And oh, it's just gorgeous.
Yes,
Gorgeous pairing.
so gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh, I hope that we've convinced readers, listeners, that they need to see it. They need to see it. They need to feel it. They need to hug it. And then they need to use it as a jumping off point for learning. And so I'll make sure that I put the link to your guide in the show notes to make it
Okay,
easier for listeners to
okay,
access.
wonderful.
I feel like we could talk about this book for a long time, but I do want to ask you before we sign off about more books because I've already said you've been busy and those books have been coming since 2022, but there's more.
There's more. Yes.
Tell us about them.
Thank goodness there's more. So I have two books coming out next year. Summer of 2025 is another nonfiction. It's called Over in the Mangroves, and it's about the Sundarbans mangrove forest, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's an ecosystem of mangroves straddling the countries of Bangladesh and India. And the structure I've used is a very familiar one. It's a very old nursery rhyme, Over in the Meadows. And I've sort of used that structure to talk about the animals that live in the mangrove ecosystem. I picked 10 animals, and then we talk about how important the mangroves are to protecting not only the animals, but also the land. And I have a thing for mangroves. I've visited quite a few. I'm actually going to visit the Sundarbans in December. And I feel like we don't understand the importance of that ecosystem in protecting our not just the land, but also the marine life. So that's coming out in in summer. And then I have a picture book called The Power of Your Name, a praise poem. And that's an ABC book, which reminds children that their names are powerful and wonderful. They're a gift. And so we go through the alphabet, and Olivia Sua, who is the illustrator of that book. The colors again in that spread are amazing. Oh, and I should mention that Diksha Pavaskar is the illustrator for Over in the Mangroves, and the use of light and the way she's depicted the mangroves. I have been super blessed with amazing illustrators. So those two are coming out. I'm really excited. The Power of Your Name is going to be a great book for educators to use at the beginning of the year. When I was a kindergarten teacher, we did a lot of work around names at the beginning of the year, and really talking to all students about, what does your name mean? Where does it come from? How do you pronounce it? How do you respect other people's names? And I found that when children get that backstory and they understand where their names come from, it's just amazing. It's powerful. And they're always so great about remembering how to pronounce it properly too.
Yeah.
Pronounce names properly. So I'm hoping that this book can serve as a really wonderful addition to, now we have some great books out there about names. It can serve as an addition for teachers to use.
I can't wait.
And then I have a few more coming out, and I have some unannounced that I can't share. Two books unannounced that I hope will be announced soon. And then I do have a nonfiction coming out, another one, 2027. It was delayed. It was supposed to come out 2026, but it's been delayed. It's called This Land, and it's about the immigration of young Punjabi farmers from India to California. And it's just, again, rhyming, very spare text, illustrated by Baljinder Kaur. And it talks about their journey and how they found a home here.
I can hear your themes that you love in these books. They sound beautiful. They sound beautiful. How exciting to know that more are coming down the pipeline. Yay.
I'm excited.
Oh, so where can listeners head online to find out more about you, to stay connected with you so that they can keep up to date on these books? Any website, social media, any place you'd like to direct them?
Yeah, sure. So my website, which is my full name, JyotiRajanGopal.com. And once you get there, you'll have the links to my my social media, Instagram and Twitter. I live there mostly, but I'm also on Facebook as Jyoti Gopal. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, also as Jyoti Gopal.
Okay, I will be sure to put links to your website, your social handles, definitely the teacher guide, and of course, links to the books to make it really easy for people to get on. And I'll end our episode by saying it's an open door policy here. So when those books are ready, I would love to have you come back to
My goodness. It would be my honor. I would love to do that. Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for spending time with us. I loved it. I love the book, and I can't wait for listeners to feel it like I did. Thank you.
Thank you.
And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.